Minister of Tourism, Mmamoloko Kubayi Ngubane, has been appointed as acting health minister. Now, concerns have been raised that deputy ministers are not members of cabinet and therefore cannot stand in for ministers. So what exactly is the role of deputy ministers? Let's discuss this with Dr. Oscar van Heerden, political analyst and international relations scholar. Dr. van Heerden, welcome to Daytime Update this afternoon. Perhaps let's kick off with that very question. What do deputy ministers do? And this in relation to the roles and responsibilities of their principal.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think as I listened to the insert, I was going to actually start there, talking about cabinet ministers and so on. But suffice to say, the role of deputy ministers, by and large, is to provide administrative support in the relevant ministry to the minister. However, they are not necessarily, as you've just heard, the accounting officer for the ministry, the political head of the ministry. That role remains with the minister. So the minister, in terms of what the requirements are, and depending on the size of the ministry, they can decide whether one or more deputy ministers are required in order to justify the workload to be shared. And as you know, there are a few ministries like Cocter, like Derco, and one or two others that actually have two deputy ministers.
The administrators are usually the ones that really know what's going on. They are the doers within the departments. Would it not make more sense then to be able to have the deputy ministers in a position to be able to fill in for their principals instead of getting somebody who is outside of that portfolio, as is in this case?
Look, I think logic certainly dictates that be the case, but you would also agree that when having to decide on an acting ministerial post, the president also has to take a few other things into consideration. It's not just this issue of the cabinet; it's also an issue of seniority, which goes hand in hand with experience as a minister, and that experience usually is in relation to cabinet and how other fellow ministers hold them to account, something that deputy ministers are not exposed to because, as has been said, they are simply observers in cabinet. And then, of course, there's also, and this is the point that a lot of people are not taking into consideration, political considerations. As you know, there are, of course, factional battles within the ANC. We all know, and it has been widely reported, that when President Ramaphosa had to constitute his cabinet immediately after the general elections in 2019, there was a lot of pressure on him from Luthuli House and other quarters to ensure that certain people actually get into certain positions, particularly in the deputy ministers' posts. And so, you know, for the president now to make this appointment as an acting, one, he was within the rules, but also he had to think about experience, seniority, and political considerations.
It was mentioned that deputy ministers do attend cabinet meetings, not because they're going to make any sort of input, but they're really there as observers. Is there a way that this system can be tweaked and readjusted in a way that we're able to really maximize the human resources that we have as a country and even as a cabinet?
Look, I think it's entirely up to the concerned minister. You know, you have ministers that follow the prescripts of the rules and treat their deputy ministers simply as that being administrative support. And then you have ministers that actually do delegate and give much more responsibilities to their deputy ministers, in a way preparing the path and the way for them should they be considered in the next elections as material to actually ascend to the ministerial position. So it's all up to what kind of leader we have within the concerned minister. And as I say, some of them treat their deputy ministers as simply administrative support. Others give them much more responsibility. I do agree with Reverend Chikane that something needs to be done in terms of the prescripts of the Constitution to try and make sure that when you are appointed as a deputy minister, chances are that that is a portfolio in which you would want to lead.
Talk us through then what that something could be, that's something that needs to be done in order to enable deputy ministers to be able to lead in the incident that the minister is not.
Look, I mean, as has been indicated, it is a constitutional matter, so you would have to get buy-in from the legislature and the majority of parliamentarians to actually amend the constitution in order to reevaluate the powers and duties of both the minister and the deputy minister, and indeed the constitution of and how the cabinet gets constituted. So it's easier said than done. It probably will be challenged and so on because people like the status quo. But I also want to just say, Tami, that, I know that at times people always argue that you want a minister that has the necessary qualifications and expertise in terms of the ministry he or she is leading. But as we've seen in the past, there are numerous examples of people who don't necessarily have the specific qualifications, but excelled in their portfolios. Trevor Manuel as a finance minister, and Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, even though she's a medical doctor, and at one stage did lead the health department, she was also very good at DERCO, as well as at Home Affairs, and there are so many other examples of that. What you really want to look for in a minister is someone who is a manager, someone who can deal with complex issues, and who deals with very big budgets.
I'd like you to perhaps contemplate this for a moment, Dr. van Heerden. When a minister is out of the country, the deputy minister cannot fill in that interim. If we look at the composition of Parliament, or we look at the composition of it all, it is not the same. We've got a president and we've got a deputy president who fills in for the president and who can take over presidential duties when a president is unable to do so. Why is it that that same principle did not trickle down and find its way through the rest of the structure? Surely that would have been the logic.
No, absolutely. I agree with you. It's something that is inexplicable. We're not sure what the rationale is. And as Reverend Frank Chikane indicated, perhaps it's a question we have to ask those that were there in the Constitutional Assembly drafting the Constitution as to why they actually decided to not devolve duties and responsibilities downwards to deputy ministers. Your guess is as good as mine as to why this is the case.
As an international relations scholar and a Fundi, how does our system compare to other countries? The type of powers and the roles that deputy ministers have there, is this common practice?
Well, two things to say from an international perspective. One is that the executive branch of our state is following the prescripts of the Constitution, which is the supreme law. So I think that is important because all other countries do exactly the same, which are if they are democracies. But the second thing to say, as you know, Tami, firstly, we have a very huge executive branch. The amount of ministers and deputy ministers is actually quite large. I mean, if you compare us with countries like Germany and other places who have much smaller cabinets, in some instances, there are no deputy ministers. Only the minister is the political head of a particular ministry. So it varies from country to country. But suffice to say, the rules are being adhered to in the case of the South African Constitution, as is the case in other democracies.
Which leads me then to another point that South Africans or some South Africans have put forward, the fact that we've got more than over 30 deputy ministers, and this really puts a burden on the public purse. What do you think? Would it be worthwhile to get rid of the deputy minister title and merely then have administrators under the executive at a lower pay scale too?
Look, I mean, I know that there are those kinds of issues, I don't think it's so much about having too much deputy ministers than a case of having way too much ministries. I think that is where we can try and make things smaller. It's really about, because by doing that, if you then say out of all the ministries we have, we actually compact it and make them a lesser number, that is how you then also deal with deputy ministers in a large way. And that really is the answer. It's so much, and of course, as you know, President Ramaphosa has gone some way. He, of course, can go further, but he has gone some way post 2019 to reduce and actually got rid of a number of ministers and as a result ministries by combining certain ministries. And I think a closer inspection should be done to try and further reduce it, if at all possible.
Well, there certainly is a work in progress, building a nation, building a country, as well as the systems that will make it operate efficiently. Dr. Oscar van Heerden, political analyst and international relations scholar, thank you once again for your insight and your time.